the carbon emissions GHG impact would be too drastic that if the rest of the world were to develop and follow the path that we do, we're screwed. That's plain and simple. We're screwed.
Julia, Anuj, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
This is super exciting. First of all, thanks for accepting my invite. You guys are working in the coolest technology. So how did you come up with the idea of merging AI with the old school permitting process?
Yeah, this is a combination that in hindsight actually makes a lot of sense between Anuj and myself because of a very, very international upbringing between Brazil and China.
Right. Julia, Anuj, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
This is super exciting for me. First of all, thanks for accepting my invite. Secondly, you are one of the most exciting guests on the show so far. You guys are working in the coolest technology and the most technology as well at the same time. So how did you guys come up with the idea of merging AI with the old school permitting process?
Yeah, this is a combination that in hindsight actually makes a lot of sense between Anuj and myself. I can start with some background. Because of a very, very international upbringing between Brazil and China, I got exposed to a lot of global issues growing up, and energy, the energy transition, climate, oil, gas, natural resources. That was always very front and center in the countries that I was involved in. And then in high school, I actually asked if my high school could install solar. It was my capstone project. And I've always been really curious about how we might leverage Brazil's abundant natural resources to do more. And so that's my first foray into solar. And that was the first step. And then I ended up coming to the United States for college. Both of my parents are artists. They moved to Brazil from China, did not have a college degree. And so they wanted me to have the opportunity to get the best education in the world, which is in the United States. And so they sent me to the US to attend undergrad at Brown University. And because I loved math and the humanities, I also had some people around me say, you should consider computer science and see what kind of impact you can make with that. So I ended up carrying this identity that I had as somebody who loved learning about the world, history, and how we've evolved over the centuries. I was very involved in Model United Nations, really cared about history, and came into this college in the United States thinking I was going to study economics and maybe get a sense of computer science. And I took my first introduction to computer science class and fell in love with it. The moment I started learning to program, to write Java, I knew that I wanted to dedicate my career to building technology. And so that's the first time that my curiosity and fascination for civilization got exposed to software engineering. And I also made a promise to myself that that's where my career was going to be, and also fell in love with hackathons in college and kept doing them throughout college, including after graduating. And even when I had real jobs at Microsoft and Apple, I kept working on all sorts of ideas. And over the years, continued nurturing my curiosity for energy, reading books about it, working on side projects during nights and weekends. And ultimately, when I left my very exciting and a job that I loved at a fintech called Brex, it became time to really look at my passions and how I wanted to take my life, my career as a software engineer, and apply that in starting a company. And we spoke to a lot of a lot of different players in the renewables ecosystem. I knew that energy was very near and dear to me. I also knew, because both of my parents were business owners of small businesses, they were merchants. I knew that I loved serving businesses, and I grew up in that environment. Brex also served businesses. I loved the idea of building for other people that were building organizations. And so a developer in the energy ecosystem is a company that aggregates resources, financial, land, real estate, and human resources to generate clean power and create value from that. And so once we fell in love with that persona, it became much clearer the kinds of problems we could solve for them. So that's a starting point of how everything led to Spark.
It sounds like you're really a child of the future and the past at the same time. So the history meeting technology, that's quite an exciting segue. And that's something that not many people actually think about combining.
Yeah, my background is somewhat diverse, but really for me, I started out very traditional in my career. I was a finance person. I was a banker for a while, but really, I think the turning point for me is, not like this eureka moment, but more like a more acute situation where I had moved to India in 2009, 2010, where my parents are from. And I was working in something completely separate. I was actually working in microfinance at the time. But living in India was a really fun, fascinating experience in that if India were to develop the way that we do in Western Europe, where you are, or the US where we are, it's just not going to happen. The carbon emissions, GHG impact would be too drastic that if the rest of the world were to develop and follow the path that we do, we're screwed. That's plain and simple. We're screwed. So while I was living there, I got really interested in infrastructure. So infrastructure broadly defined, roads, tolls, bridges, but also electrical infrastructure. And when I got back to the US after spending a few years in India, I was laser focused on renewables and energy. So I came back in 2010 and immediately joined the Obama administration at the Department of Energy. 2010, for those who might remember, was not a good year. Credit markets were frozen. We were still recovering from the Great Recession. And the Department of Energy, ironically, the federal government was, I think the largest investor, definitely the most active investor, through debt and loan guarantees in domestic renewables. So that's why I got started. That group at that time worked on the loan for Tesla, which built the NUMMI factory in Fremont. It did a bunch of great wind and domestic solar. I worked on a project called the Caithness Wind Farm in eastern Washington State. And basically since 2010, more or less, I've been focused on energy and energy infrastructure. And I just love it. It's, what I look at. It's what I read. It's kind of how I view the world. And I've been in it ever since. You had asked a question earlier. I want to hit that head on, was how did we marry AI and permitting for solar, right? Kind of weird. And it's probably what you and your audience hear and think about all the time, but AI is electricity. It is the new electricity. If you're not using it to rethink your workflow, you are probably not going to be cutting edge. So it was only natural for us to think about workflows in this industry, which we know generally pretty well, and how AI might make those better. And that's it. And the rest isn't we know the answer, but we are in motion and in process of layering in AI so that the job can be done better, so that more solar can be built and more clean electrons can flow.
And maybe can you guys speak to, most companies are actually putting AI as the icing on top of the cake, and you guys actually build the cake out of AI. So what's the difference? Can you walk us through how is the methodology and the thinking behind that? How does that differ?
It all started with the problem. As Anuj mentioned, permitting is one of the largest headaches that developers encounter today. The two largest sources of project delays and cancellations are interconnection and permitting. Within permitting, of course, there are land use ordinances, laws, as well as local politics, local sentiment, and NIMBYism. And I remember this was, even though Anuj and I, we've both been in the tech world for years, and I've fallen in love with the realm of natural language. since my natural language processing class in undergrad. And so it's always been there. So it was never like, this is a cool new technology, let me make sense of it. It was more when exploring this world of energy generation, this massive, massive space, we kept hearing over and over again, permitting this, permitting that, zoning laws, conditional use permits, special use permits, so different across every 3,000 counties in the US, 20,000 jurisdictions in the US. I remember somebody saying to me, I think this was probably in 2023, somebody saying, you're dealing with a patchwork of jurisdictions. There's no way to unify that. There's no way to truly make sense of that at scale. And that's when we started thinking, interesting, really? How hard can it be to make sense out of this patchwork of jurisdictions? 20,000 jurisdictions, each one with their 500,000 page zoning ordinances. At the same time, in 2023, LLMs were really coming into the scene, not just the methodology itself, but the tooling around it. That's when vector databases, LangChain, and all of these libraries came out and made it very easy for you to build apps out of all this. We also started hearing a lot of developers saying, what about this in the IRA? What about this tax credit, that PTC, that ITC? Does this apply or not? And so that's when we also started asking ourselves, has anybody built a chatbot to ask questions about the Inflation Reduction Act? Right now, all of this seems like a given. But back then in 2023, nobody had. And so what did we do? We took the Inflation Reduction Act, we built a retrieval augmented generation RAG-based chatbot so that developers could ask questions about different provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's when things started clicking. For the first time, technology became available and the toolkits and the frameworks became available to build user experiences to make sense and unify and create workflows, as Anuj pointed out of all of this information.
Well, I think, people might think it was only 2 years ago, but now it feels like light years, especially, with the development of LLMs and what they can do and how they can do it and how they actually infiltrated your day-to-day life, especially your professional life. For example, for myself, I'm using 5 different tools and I don't know how to code. So I think that's the keystone moment there, that when the tables are turning, but the average Joe can actually use AI for their own benefit, and layering that to a more, so to speak, boring process of permitting, I think is the perfect use case.
Exactly. And it wouldn't have been possible before. The ways to achieve this, well, they would have been a lot more cumbersome. And we took the first stab in 2023, started seeing some traction. And to your point, Peter, the technology is evolving very, very quickly. And so I remember even a year ago, summer of 2024, we were trying to make sense out of zoning ordinances, ingesting them, and it wasn't as easy as it is right now. And so every time a new model or new capabilities, whether it's for interpreting data, for searching the web, for processing images and PDFs, as soon as they come out, we make a big effort to pounce on it. We're all over it. And thanks to Y Combinator, we have some access to these models early on. And we get very excited when new technology comes out because that means we can put them in the hands of our customers as quickly as possible.
Exciting. And you mentioned the Y Combinator as well and multiple hackathons in your past. Can you draw maybe 2 or 3 key lessons that you learned from those, maybe from YC or any other hackathon as well, that you're actually using today in your professional life?
Yeah, I think both Anuj and I will have our versions of it. YC is such a rich experience and ecosystem, and both of us went through it in our own ways and learned from it. From hackathons and Y Combinator, one of the biggest lessons is to get things out fast and iterate quickly. Doing that while talking to users. I remember during the YC batch, that was everything that we did, was iterate on product, talk to users, and rinse and repeat. It seems very simple as a concept, but it can be much easier said than done, especially for engineers. I was an engineer by training, even though I had a lot of hackathons, which helped with putting something out and then talking to people. The hackathons, I didn't really think about commercial feasibility, to be honest, of my projects. It was usually, let me tinker with a piece of technology, see how it works. Let me play with this library. But in YC, you need a business that works. You need revenue. And so it's a new approach. So that's one. And the other lesson that I learned at YC that I wouldn't have learned anywhere else was just getting my hands dirty with B2B sales. We are in a SaaS and B2B SaaS podcast. To me, that was very new. I knew nothing about pricing and contracts and commercial terms, the MEDIC framework. I remember just scrambling to learn about this stuff during the batch. And it's still very much a work in progress. And I'm learning every day. And it's great to have someone like Anuj as a thought partner and mentor to learn from on that front. So sales is everything. It's all the time. And so, yeah, I think the building, the product velocity, the sales. And then I think the final thing is really something that YC says is you have to try not to die. If you don't die, it sounds very obvious. If you don't die, then you might have a swing, a shot at getting to the next stage. And the further along you are, the more likely it is that you will survive as a company. And so really thinking about how do we not die? Sometimes it's based on morale. Sometimes it's based on having a source of oxygen like customers. And sometimes it's just a team that really, really believes in one another and in the mission. And so that is constantly top of mind for me.
And I think it must have been really difficult for you because I've been working with engineers more or less my whole professional career. And I know that engineers want to put stuff out when it's perfect. And the sales guys or the business guys want to put it out as soon as it's half baked and let's try and test it. And the real truth is somewhere in between, right? So that's kind of your balance here as well with Anuj.
Yeah. So, for those who work in enterprise sales or mid-market sales, there's this idea of forward selling. Sell something that isn't necessarily fully baked, and that's okay. And that's okay because when you have those forward sell conversations, you are gathering feedback. And I'll come to that, but I actually want to go back to the question that you asked about YC. It's very interesting because if you meld these two ideas, there's something very, very, very interesting. What YC teaches you among many, many, many things is that you can be uncomfortable and not fully baked when you talk to customers and prospective customers. And the reason is that if you are truly building a new technology, it can and should be 10x better. Even if your product isn't fully QA QC'd, like, in the way that a big tech company might be, you are probably already delivering value that is multiple times better than your user already has. So go out and do it. Be uncomfortable. Talk to that user, forward sell that user. Not out of any capitalist selfishness, but because you're actually genuinely already doing right by your prospective user by virtue of the fact that your technology, if you believe in it, is already 10x better. So you have to go out there. And if you don't, and you wait for another 6, 9, 12 months till it's perfect, whatever that is, you're too late. The world would have moved on. In our world as a founders, it's like, you do wake up or like, what has OpenAI released? Is it taking over my business? You've got to move fast. You have to believe that your vertical focus, your true understanding of workflows and your users is genuinely benefiting them and will create space between you and the next best competitor. So that's the way we think about it. That's the way I thought about it at my first startup. That's the way I think about it now. And it's definitely been true. And the second quick thing is when you come from an industry, you built credibility to go and speak with an executive who is running a solar development firm and talk to them. The product doesn't need to be as big as Salesforce or HubSpot or some big software that we all know. You can go and talk to them as a peer. Talk to them about their problems, learn something from them, and probably leave that conversation displaying empathy, but maybe teaching them something about their business that they didn't know. That happens, and it happens every day, whether or not your product is fully baked or not. So going in and having those conversations, not necessarily thinking I'm going to sign a contract today, actually matters much less. But beginning that series of conversations of partnership and learning is super fun. And that's part from YC, meaning just go have the conversations, talk to your users, but also just having come from the industry and having the credibility and two-way respect of executives you meet in solar and battery storage.
And I think you are in the right industry when it comes to this, because I personally have worked in multiple industries, and the renewables industry is probably one of the most open-minded. So I haven't come across a hard rejection of, okay, I want to speak to CEO of X company, and they would just, straight out refuse you. Everybody is quite open-minded. Everybody is open to share. And especially when you ask the right questions, it triggers them, and they understand and appreciate the value of the right question to their product and also to the business as a whole.
Certainly, there is a little bit of an underdog mentality that, certain times, and this is an interesting juncture as well, where, whether or not you're a competitor let's say you're talking to two solar development shops, there is a underdog mentality that binds people together that, we are fighting a larger fight, and particularly now, right? Your audience is already very familiar with what's happening in the macro level and the budget bills. And I think this, interesting timing, like, RE Plus is next week, which is, as we were talking about earlier, a pretty large conference, but like there is, I think, a degree of camaraderie and in the midst of competition and, good fights.
Hey, indeed. And as you mentioned, the macro is not exactly stacked in our favor, and not in the US and not exactly in Europe either. What is the feeling from the market?
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic, and we speak with a lot of developers every single day. What we see a lot among our customers is a combination of sobriety, like being aware of what's happening. Is a very sobering moment. And it's a shock, right? Because just 2 or 3 years ago, it was it was a party. It was the Inflation Reduction Act. It was, $400 billion earmarked for heat pumps, electrification, EVs, and solar, everything. Now, all of a sudden, that's been slapped in the face. And so it is sobering. At the same time, the analogy I like to think to very often is the Three Little Pigs story. When there's three little pigs, one of them builds a house out of toothpicks, another one out of bricks, and another one out of steel. And when there's a storm, one of these will survive and the others are going to get knocked out. And that's what we're seeing now. Thankfully, across Spark's customer base, we have some of the industry and the world's brightest, strongest developers. Some of them have even stronger appetites around greenfielding. They want to acquire land as quickly as possible. They're going after the land grab opportunity, while others, they want to acquire existing projects. They want to gobble up the ones that are likely to not survive this macro environment. But all in all, the best developers are feeling a sense of urgency, whether it's from an opportunity perspective or from adjust our strategy to make sure we survive and navigate. That is very much in the air. So that is one general feeling that I'll share: consolidation and urgency, and definitely sobering times.
Indeed. So I've been talking to a lot of folks about this, and it's, some people have mixed feelings. Others are actually welcoming it because it's kind of also part of a natural learning curve and also a cleansing process of the industry, right? So people who were kind of surfing on the wave of the free and the easy money now might be a bit squeezed and might be pushed out of business. But the people who have been building on solid foundations, as the Three Little Pigs, as Julia mentioned, I think those guys are actually in the right position to even acquire those businesses and, ultimately to build a stronger ecosystem as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think, we, as Julia mentioned, speak with a lot of developers and, look, it's a mixed bag, right? There are folks who are very scared. and have retreated. And there are other folks who are not and are doing the exact opposite. And, I think there's a few things that probably dictate the reaction. And, one is what type of development you're doing. Renewables is not a monolith. There are different nuances here. And insofar that we're talking about macro, storage versus solar are very different. I think storage is ITC, like in service stipulation till 2032. So still a lot of time and less sort of foreign supplier rules. So I think that's one. Folks who are already there, well positioned, are pretty happy. Two is what type of capital you have. For the 15 years, I've been in and around developers, project developers, not software developers, obviously. There's been different types of capital, patient capital versus not patient capital, and different costs of capital. So those who have patient low cost of capital are doing great and actually very excited about, and to kind of supplement what Julia was saying, acquire projects. Actually, right now they're salivating. They're wildly happy. And I think that's kind of the second piece is what type of capital you have. And then lastly is, related number two is if you're build, own, operate versus just like develop and flip, your world is very different. You're actually looking at, I can make a lot of money right now. Those are the three kind of characteristics that we are looking at as we kind of figure out where to spend our time. Anecdotally, like there's just a lot of demand for making sure development is better, faster, cheaper. We're also trying to look at characteristics of developers well. And I would say that's kind of the lens through which we're using, we're viewing it now, are those three. I think the last thing I'll mention, but this is the underpinning that I think is debatable and maybe fun for a conversation like this, is electricity demand is going up, right? I think we all agree. If you don't, raise your hand here. AI is going to underpin that, and data centers will be something that supports that trajectory or that trend of growth. And if you believe that, people got to buy power somewhere. What's it going to be? Is it going to be nuclear that takes 10 years to permit, actually place in service? Is it going to be coal that is just not cost competitive right now in spite of the macro and subsidies that go to fossil? I mean, the US is a big supporter of fossil fuels, has been for 100 years, and continues to give massive subsidies to oil and gas. And that's fine. But if you actually look at it, and I believe this is debatable, hopefully people are listening to this and want to talk about it. What are the energy technologies you're going to use? Natural gas, CCGT, solar, and some other emerging technologies that will grow, and they should, and I hope they do. But are they really going to be the bulk of what's built? I don't know. So if you have a fundamental belief that electricity demand is growing up, and you have a fundamental belief that solar is at least partially competitive, and I think it is, I think all studies will show that, you got to believe that in spite of the macro environment, it's going to be okay. Now, poor developer or, firms that weren't well capitalized will go. And, that's just the market. So generally, I think I feel positive. We feel positive as a company, and we definitely, without naming names, have different types of conversations. That's just the truth of the matter. I'll pause.
And I think the most important, perhaps, graph that's circulating on the internet is, the terawatt hours, the 4 terawatt hours production in the US and the 10 plus terawatt hours in China. I think we don't even need to be, pro renewables. We just need to understand that we need to produce as much as possible without AI. Now, if we layer AI on top of this, then the consumption is exponential. And the US has been producing the 4 terawatt hours for the last 10-ish years. I think we need all the energy we can get.
Yeah. Having lived and, having this exposure and connection to China, I know that this is way more than ideology. This is not just about climate. This is not just about decarbonization. This is about development, economic development, infrastructure development. And just like there's an arms race with AI, there's an arms race with all kinds of resources and power. And so I think we have to, in the US, we have to be thoughtful about our resource generation and regardless of policy, the demand is undeniable. And so it's a very, very interesting time to be building and following everything that's going on in the energy world, which is so closely related to AI and this unstoppable evolution.
The perspective, I think the keyword here is really, we need to be more utilitarian. We shouldn't think about, ideally not burning more coal, etc. But the cheapest source of energy should win. And the cheapest source of energy right now, even with storage, is solar. So, everybody can or solar and wind, or batteries and wind. Now this year, what I'm hearing from everybody is the year of battery storage and the year of hybrid projects all across the globe, both in Europe and the US, and now Asia is picking up as well, besides China, of course, because China left us in the dust completely in terms of output, but hopefully we can catch up.
One of the biggest trends we are seeing across our customer base and the developers we talk to is that adaptation when it comes to technologies. Developers that are historically more solar focused, like standalone solar, are now embracing battery storage, some of them for the first time. And many jurisdictions in the US are also trying to figure out what permitting should be like for battery storage. And that's not to mention co-location of solar and storage and natural gas with data centers. So adaptation comes in the form of different types of technologies and also in different business opportunities. Instead of PPAs with utilities and businesses, there are a lot of developers going after the data center opportunity.
One thing that, I as a related point, I want to take a step back and say, the price of battery storage over the last 10 years or maybe 12 years is something to marvel at. I mean, it is technology done right. I don't actually know the metrics offhand, like the forward cost curve starting in 2012, 2013 on lithium ion, but it's got to be astounding. It has unlocked so many applications, not only for bulk battery storage in front of the meter or whatever, but everything around us, our electric vehicles, our micro mobility, our electric bikes, it is just a feat of human ingenuity. How did that happen? And I think it gets enough applause. We should be super proud of it. And the reason why it's relevant and important for this is baseload power is hard, and how do you get intermittent sources to look and feel like it? And, you got to have some storage. And the fact that storage is cheaper is something that allows this industry just to be really, truly competitive. And a lot of people debate, is LCOE the right metric or not, right? Does it take into account intermittency? Fair. But I think to your point, Peter, you said something, even if you have a combined project, even if you have solar plus storage, it's cost competitive. And I think that's absolutely true. So I
have a relatively fresh piece of data from ISC Constance from Germany. And basically we, at least in Europe, we are hovering around 6 cents per a kilowatt. That's including storage. So solar, utility scale solar plus storage. So that's definitely a good figure to be looking at. And maybe in the US, it's even less. So that's an interesting number to benchmark against. And I think that number is only going to drop. It's only going to go lower and the development should be faster. The only thing that's holding us back in the solar space is permitting, as you guys mentioned, and you guys are targeting both in the US, especially in Europe, because we love our rules and obstacles of business and regulation. We even have an office in San Francisco for regulation. So, it's not the right direction to go when you want to do business.
Yeah, there is such an interesting thread here that we don't necessarily need to spend time on, but obviously Ezra Klein and Abundance have captured the moment in a lot of different ways. And how do you as a progressive build supply? And, we focused on permitting, right? One of our focus areas as a company is permitting. And this really hits at the core of, we want to build right, but are there a lot of regulations that are for the right reasons, but maybe implemented in interesting ways? But, our goal is in part to create abundance, right? Let's just go create more energy. It's not an or question, it's an and question. Let's go build a lot of everything. We're confident that when you build solar and storage, it's going to win. But there's an interesting thread to pull on there, which is just how did this get so hard? How did it take till 2025 for us to look at, some of the CEQA and, a lot of the other rules that are, 40-ish years old now that have really suppressed supply of all types of electrons.
I mean, that's an interesting angle. Yeah, I mean, there needs to be some regulation in place, of course, but it should be updated, and it should be updated a bit more regularly than it is. And it should be more meaningful as well, because ultimately we are just standing in the way of progress.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we see that with energy now. We also see that with AI. We've seen that with cryptocurrency. It's as if with every breakthrough, there's a questioning of historical policies and an ongoing dialogue and update to all of those ordinances and laws that have been around for tens or hundreds of years. And that's something we speak to our customers about a lot as well, is the recency of a piece of policy, the likelihood of it changing. So it's very much a constantly evolving landscape. And it's a lot of things to keep track of at different levels of jurisdiction, from local governments to state to federal. It's truly complex.
For sure. And I mean, when it comes to the typical projects that you guys work with or help, is that only on the utility scale side, or are you guys also doing CN?
We typically support front of the meter projects ranging from a couple of megawatts all the way to hundreds of megawatts. And these are the kinds of projects that will have various elements to it. There's land, there is permitting, there's interconnection, and then there's PPAs. And so barring interconnection and PPAs, that commercial arrangement and agreement, permitting and land, those are elements that we support these projects with. CNI, or behind the meter projects, we tend to see less because the overall process for them, due to the nature of these projects, perhaps due to size or their permitting process, is relatively more constrained and addressable. And so we are currently focused on projects that need to generate a lot of power and have multiple stakeholders involved, and months in that permitting and interconnection, sometimes years in that process. But also when they do come online, they're powering thousands of homes or businesses.
And what is your biggest challenge when you talk to customers? What is kind of the biggest pushback, or what is the main pain point that you really need to educate on?
I can take a stab, and then I'm curious to get Anuj's thoughts as well. This is an industry that has relied on manually doing things and using human judgment and using our hands and our eyes and ears to read, to draft, to interact. And that's also why a lot of developers historically, they focused on one region. Until now, there are opportunities all over the country. And if you just focus on Maryland, you're really limiting the amount of land and opportunities that you have access to. There are policies coming up everywhere in the country. And so if you're going to be smart and savvy about your business, then you are expanding. And so it's hitting a point where it's not as feasible to just specialize in a small state, even if it has a policy that you've grokked. That said, there's still a lot of that connection with human analysis and the quality and precision of having somebody do something by hand. And so we at Spark, we do hold ourselves to a very high bar in terms of precision and thoroughness and accuracy. But we do get the pushback a lot of times on, what is the fidelity of this data? How accurate is it? Has a human reviewed it? Has it been vetted? And I like to draw the analogy of, when a Waymo gets into a car crash, or when something goes wrong with an autonomous vehicle, the scrutiny and the punishment is very loud and very strongly against. Whereas autonomous vehicles are meaningfully, significantly safer than human drivers. And so that's one sort of educational or perception shift that I think we're all navigating.
For sure. And I mean, on a deeply philosophical level, it's quite difficult for humans to understand exponential change, right? Like we are only coded to understand linear change. And now in the world of exponential change, everywhere we are looking, it's quite challenging, to keep your head above the water. And especially for people who are a little bit older or used to, a little bit slower pace of life, it's quite challenging. And I think we need to navigate that with good UI, UX and building just a more simple to use product.
Yeah. And I prefer to, if we have to, and if it makes sense to meet the customers where they are and earn their trust. And I think Anuj mentioned this aspect of learning. This is not just about shoving something down people's throats, and it's not about saying you're going to get left behind if you don't adopt this kind of technology, but rather approaching it with humility and curiosity about what is missing and how can we bridge that gap between our current offering and what you're looking for.
Yeah, there might be a couple things, reiterate a little bit. There's this, I'm sure there's a more technical term for it, but there's like an unfair rubric, right, that people apply here. The question I believe, but once again, my perspective is that one should ask about whatever business, I'm speaking somewhat generically right now, is can we do this better? Not can we do it perfectly? Those are very different questions. Can we do this better? Can we do it X better, 10X better? When you think about permitting and zoning and understanding a local jurisdiction, there is a lot to grasp. And I've done it before. I was a developer for many years, both behind the meter CNI as well as utility scale. And there's a lot of unfun stuff. Maybe some people really enjoy it, but I found it not as fun. And when you think about new technology, the question isn't, is it perfect? And if it's not perfect, I will say no. It's, can this make me better? Can this make me more competitive? And then I think Julia's point was perfect. Can I now go into other markets, geographic markets that I couldn't be before because I had a natural constraint on knowledge? And there are so many developers that are thinking like that, and it's been heartening to speak with them and help them grow. And that is the funnest part of this job. It is the funnest part of starting a company, is creating something that the world has never seen, truly from scratch, speaking to people about it, allowing them to take the next step, using it and watching them grow is like why you work. And it is so much fun. The second piece there that's very related to the first piece is so much about starting a company and being a founder is about this is so hard. Sure. But there's actually some really great benefits that we have that make us more competitive and better suited to kind of win than some of the bigger companies. And it has to do with this question you asked, is like, what are some of the objections that our prospective customers have? And there's plenty. And one of them I just spoke about, which is it perfect? Not is it much, much, much better than the way I do things status quo? And part of it is, as a startup, you actually don't need to win because you're early. You're actually only trying to get to the true top of the heap, meaning the people who already they have a problem. They might already be searching Google and ChatGPT for an answer. Your job right now is to reach those people. I'm not trying to convince, look, if you're Salesforce right now, you need to go really deep penetration into every industry in America and the world and sell those people. And you've got upper mid-market, SMB, and enterprise teams going and doing it. We don't. And we don't even have to. All we need to do is find the people who already realize that they could probably do something better, and we just partner with them to go do it. And that is such a fascinating, lovely realization as a founder that actually makes the sales conversation kind of fun. Because all you're trying to do is have some, do you have this problem? I'm not going to convince you. Just, do you have it? But you do. Let's talk about it a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about your details. And then you flip the script, you tell them about what you do, and you say, hey, is there a match? And it's beautiful. So, objections or not, there are, but our goal is to just find the early adopters here, of which there are plenty, because I think you said this earlier, Peter, people are generally amenable and want to do things better. Solar still is a new technology versus other energy technology. So I think it does attract a cohort of people who are like naturally curious and want to do things better.
For sure. And I mean, before we hit record, we were talking about how to put more electrons out in the world. How does the product actually help you guys do that? Or what is the kind of domino effect of using the product?
Yeah, we like to think of the acceleration of development, and both in terms of quality and the likelihood that you as a developer are doubling down on the right assets, as well as how much you're able to develop and generate in terms of electricity. Because the electrons, to your point, Peter, this is the asset that you are producing and creating and capturing value with. So in terms of the acceleration of project velocity, today, before or without something like Spark or using technology to better interpret local sentiment and zoning ordinances, land use ordinances, and moratoria, the way that you do it is you are kind of in the blind. And I'm quoting some of our customers, is that you're in the blind. You find some land that looks promising, that's reasonably close to interconnection or transmission lines, and you talk to a landowner and you try to get site control. You do that as much as possible. You cast a wide net, but you might not know what kinds of permits you need in that particular zoning district or in that particular authority having jurisdiction. It might not be until you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars across dozens of sites that you realize there's very, very strong local opposition here. And so you're usually starting out with a funnel. And what Spark aims to do is, instead of shooting in the dark, we help you shoot more sharply and on the sites that will actually see the light of day. I think the Lawrence Berkeley Lab ran a study, and about 30% of projects get canceled, utility scale, and 50 to 80% of projects get delayed. And that's all related to permitting and sentiment. And so that's something we help developers avoid by increasing that likelihood of success. And so if you are spending your time and resources on the right projects, you will also have more bandwidth to crank out more of those projects and therefore increase your bottom line and the energy that you are generating and selling. And from an even broader perspective, we've been talking about more electrons. We talk about this generation. The world needs to double or triple our pace of clean energy generation, right? So when we think about it that way, our dream is that Spark can move the needle on that path to our 2050 goals by truly accelerating the development of clean energy projects and overall energy infrastructure.
For sure. And I mean, when it comes to the software stack that a typical developer uses, I've been working with them quite frequently, and a typical company would use 5-6 different tools. How do you guys integrate with maybe some of the pre-existing tools that they already use? Or how do you guys, try to make their life easier to have a more continuous workflow?
Yeah, there are a number of tools that we've spoken to so many developers that we know the typical stack. It's really heartening to see that some parts of the stack are now shifting towards Spark from some more traditional solutions. But one that we really like to integrate with is GIS solutions that help developers identify land, identify parcels near substations or interconnection. What we see some developers do is, once they have a set of parcels that they find promising, that is exported as a CSV or an Excel that then gets uploaded into Spark. This is more of a manual integration today. Of course, there are ways that this could evolve through APIs in the future. But one thing we do see a lot is that kind of export from one system, importing it into Spark to get that next level data on zoning, sentiment, moratoria, nearby projects, and other data points on permitting feasibility.
I wanted to make sure we hit this head on. Like, how does Spark work? All right. And I pride myself, as people joke, on being like very plain spoken and like using no bullshit jargon. We're a B2B SaaS. We're a web application. You log on, you type in your username and password. You hit enter, you get in. And you basically type in a geography. You type in a town, a county, a village, some geographic identifier, maybe an APN, a parcel number, and you press enter. All right. When you press enter, you're going to get all this really cool information, but it revolves around 4 main topics. And this is the type of information that would otherwise take people hours upon hours, if not days, and consultants thousands of dollars to get there. Number 1, you get this incredible zoning information. What's the zoning code? What are the setbacks? All the sort of like stuff that's like you can do. It's just annoying. And it's very hard and time consuming depending on where you are. Number 2, you get all this path to permitting. What does permitting look like? All this sort of stuff. Voting records of city council members, like who is likely to be for or against your project. You know, a lot of developers go into that city council meeting and they don't know which way that person's going to vote. Well, you probably should. Number 3, we're going to tell you about all the past projects, like what other developers have done other projects. How long did it take them to get permitted? All that sort of like, you may or may not be the first organization to done something here. In some cases you are, in some cases you're not. But if you aren't, you should know about it. And then, number 4 is there's this idea of sentiment. What are the vibes of a certain area? Is the local opposition and the citizenry pro or against? Do they think solar causes cancer? I don't know. But that's a collection of news articles and social information and city council and meeting minutes and agendas. And there's all this like stuff that comprises sentiment. It is impossible for a human to read literally thousands of documents, millions collectively across the US, but thousands per geography, and have read all of them and summarized. It is impossible. And the beauty of being an AI first company and using a large language model is that it's good at language. So we use AI for what it's meant to be for at this point, which is read all the language, the corpus of language that there is. Literally thousands of documents for geography and millions of documents collectively nationwide. And just summarize it and then give you the information that matters most. In today's day and age, there's so much tools out there that people are just being bombarded with information. They don't know how to sift through to make sense of it. The reason why we're an AI workflow software is we take all of that to heart. We use the AI to get all the information and summarize it. And we use the workflow, the true knowledge of the way a developer, the user, have heavy empathy. And we put it in a format that we now know is useful for that individual to go do their job. And I just want to make sure I tell you, how does Spark work? What does it actually do? Because ultimately that's what it's all about. It's wildly simple in some ways. You're going to log on. It's like the most simple, minimalist, beautiful, black and white user interface you've ever seen. But it's just going to kind of integrate into how you do things and make things easier.
What kind of people would you like to connect with, or who would you like to speak to, both in terms of partnerships, potential customers, any sort of integrations? Who are the most interesting people for you guys to speak to in this space?
We love meeting developers. We love learning from them and understanding their challenges and their goals and hopes. As Anuj mentioned, one thing we are known for is the simplicity of our user interface. And where we are seeing more resonation is in early adopters who want to get the bleeding edge of technology in their hands, but also in a very intuitive way. And so we've partnered with companies like Dorel, Cypress Creek, UGE, Pinegate, and many others that have this appetite for trying out new ways of doing the same kind of work, but then scaling up that development activity. And so first and foremost, we love to engage with developers, primarily to learn and connect with them and to exchange knowledge. We also have peers in this ecosystem who serve developers in different ways and build different parts of the stack for them. And that's always fun and enlightening to have those exchanges, whether it's people building in getting tax credits, getting certain processes certified, filing for RFPs. That is also a kind of dialogue that we're really excited about. And of course, we're always looking to speak with software engineers and AI aficionados who like to build software. We have a very, very strong software and technology team, and it is one of our one of the things we're most proud of is our ability to connect the best in class in the energy space with the most passionate and strong engineers. So that's the kind of team I want to build. So always looking out for talented engineers who are passionate about building the future of energy.
We are thrilled to get to speak with some of the best builders of our generation. And by builders, I mean energy, in the energy context. If you develop and build solar battery projects and or battery projects, we would be delighted to speak with you, get to learn how you do things, and maybe find a way to work together. That's it.
Cool. And on that note, what would be the right way for people to reach out to you?
We have a website, SparkHQ.ai, not to be confused with Spark.ai, which we hope to have soon, but it is SparkHQ.ai today. And there is a link to book a call with us on that website. And we can also be reached through email, whether it's Anuj at or Julia at SparkHQ. Very easy.
I will make sure to link those in the show notes below. And any final thoughts, guys? We've covered a lot of ground. Exciting that you would like to add as closing remarks?
I would just say that this has been such a fun conversation that reminds me of why we're doing what we're doing. And we are at a juncture in time where the energy transition is very much in full swing. And the world is no longer the same after ChatGPT. It's not the same anymore. And we're going in a completely different future than the life we were living even just 5 years ago. And so it's very exciting to be building now and to be thinking about how while the demand for electricity continues to grow, we're going to continue navigating this patchwork of policies nationally in the US at the different levels of jurisdiction and government. It's that they're interweaved. The energy generation and policy creation and policy evolution, that is going to continue to change. And at Spark, we want to be the operating system that helps developers and asset managers and maybe even more players in that ecosystem participate in the future that we're building from an energy infrastructure perspective. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, that's the future we'll also be adapting towards with our customers. So it's been really exciting to have a conversation about this.
Indeed, where there is a will, there is a way. Right?
Exactly.
Look, I, in spite of like recent developments and whatnot, I don't think there's going to be some magic wand that makes solar development easy. It's going to continue to be complex, I think increasingly complex. And I think software will be essential to solar and battery storage. We believe that the better tools can lead to faster, cheaper, and more reliable project delivery and cleaner electrons on the grid. And look, I think the future of solar depends on innovation and grasping and supporting new technologies. So we're just delighted to be a small part of a bigger movement. And yeah, I think that's what I'll leave it with.
Awesome. Let's build more solar together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.